The massive Zorathian warship hovered above Earth, its metallic surface absorbing the golden light of the sun. Below, billions of humans stood still, their eyes locked onto the dark monolith in the sky. They had seen the broadcasts. They had heard the message. Kneel, and you will be spared. The voice of the Zorath overlord echoed across the planet. It was not a threat. It was a statement, cold and final. For centuries, the Zorath had expanded their dominion, conquering every species they encountered. There was no battle, no resistance, only surrender. And yet, Earth remained silent. From the towering skyscrapers of New York to the vast deserts of Australia, from the frozen tundras of Canada to the rolling green hills of England, no one moved. The entire planet seemed frozen in time. On the bridge of the Zorath flagship, Supreme Commander Vek's golden eyes narrowed. He had seen this scene unfold countless times. Some civilizations had fallen to their knees immediately, overwhelmed by fear. Others had hesitated for a moment before surrendering. But never, not once, had a species simply ignored the command. Vek's voice deepened, reverberating through the very bones of those who heard it. You do not understand. We are the Zorath. We have ruled for 10,000 years. We are invincible. You will kneel. The silence continued. Then, from the heart of the crowd, a single voice rose. Not from a leader, not from a warrior, but from a simple man standing among millions. His words were not shouted, yet they carried through the air like thunder. No. A ripple of unease passed through the Zorath officers on the warship. Vek's hands clenched into fists. He had expected submission. He had expected fear. But this was something else. He turned to his officers. Initiate the first phase. Show them the cost of defiance. The warship's engines roared to life, a display of power meant to break their spirit. Buildings shook, the ground trembled, the sky darkened with the shadow of the invaders. Yet humanity did not waver. The Zorath had conquered thousands of worlds. But for the first time in history, they faced a species that refused to kneel. And deep within the heart of the universe, something shifted. The battle for Earth had begun. On the Zorathian warship, Supreme Commander Vek stared at the planet below, his golden eyes dark with frustration. The silence from Earth was unnatural. It wasn't fear. It wasn't hesitation. It was something he had never encountered before, defiance. Do they not understand? One of his officers muttered, his reptilian features tight with unease. No species has ever resisted this long. Why don't they kneel? Vek exhaled sharply. He had seen civilizations beg for mercy before a single shot was fired. The Zorath did not conquer through brute force alone, they made it clear that resistance was futile before the first battle ever began. And yet, these humans stood as if they were immune to fear itself. Begin Phase 1, Vek commanded. A demonstration of power. No casualties, yet. The warship's cannons adjusted their aim. Targeting systems locked onto several locations across the planet, empty plains, uninhabited islands, remote mountains. Massive beams of energy surged downward, slamming into the Earth with terrifying precision. Within moments, the landscape was reshaped by the force of the strikes. Dust and smoke curled into the sky. Oceans boiled where the beams made contact. The message was clear: submit now, or be erased. The Zorath officers watched their monitors, expecting immediate surrender. This was the moment when most civilizations realized the inevitable. But humanity was different. Vek leaned forward, watching as the smoke cleared. The cities remained untouched. The people remained standing. Then, something happened that made even the battle-hardened Zorath commander pause. Across the world, humans did not cower. They did not plead. They did not break. Instead, they started moving. In the streets, people began working together, reinforcing buildings, setting up defenses. Scientists huddled in labs, exchanging ideas in rapid bursts of excitement. Military leaders coordinated across continents, preparing strategies with a sense of purpose that should not exist in the face of an overwhelming enemy. A quiet hum of resistance spread across the planet. Dek's eyes narrowed. What is this? The officer beside him checked the data, disbelief creeping into his voice. They are adapting. Not surrendering. Not panicking. They're preparing. A shiver of uncertainty ran through the Zorath ranks. This was not how it was supposed to go. No species had ever responded like this. No species had ever dared to challenge the invincible Zorath Empire. But humanity wasn't like the others. They were something else. And for the first time in 1,000 years, the Zorath realized they might not be as invincible as they believed. Deep within the Zorath flagship, Supreme Commander Vec paced the bridge, his golden eyes locked onto the screens displaying Earth. He had expected panic. He had expected the usual signs of a civilization breaking under the weight of Zorathian supremacy. But what he saw instead made his blood run cold. Commander, reports are coming in from across the planet, an officer said, his voice uncertain. The humans are not just resisting. They're organizing. Vec studied the data. Military bases across the world had gone silent, but not because of fear. They were switching to underground networks. Satellites were being repositioned in low orbit, creating a global web of encrypted communications. Factories were shifting production at alarming speeds, repurposing civilian technology into something else. They weren't reacting. They were planning. Vec exhaled slowly. This was something the Zorath had never encountered before. Every species they had faced fell into one of two categories, those who submitted and those who fought blindly until they were destroyed. But humans, they were something new. Commander, another officer interrupted, his voice uneasy. We intercepted a human transmission. Vec's eyes snapped toward him. Play it. The bridge fell silent as a human voice crackled through the speakers. It was calm, firm, not the voice of a desperate species facing annihilation. You assume we are like the others you have conquered. That we will kneel, because you demand it. But you do not understand us. We are not fighting for survival alone. We are fighting because we choose to. You may have weapons, but we have something stronger. Try to take this planet, and you will learn the meaning of true resistance. The transmission cut off. A heavy silence settled over the Zorath officers. None of them spoke. They had never heard anything like it before. One of the younger officers, his voice hesitant, finally said what no one else dared to. They're not afraid of us. Vec clenched his jaw. He turned toward the massive viewport, staring down at the blue and green world below. If this was true, if these humans were truly different, then this war would not be over in days. It would not be over in weeks. For the first time in Zorathian history, the outcome of a conquest was uncertain. Vec's hand tightened into a fist. Send the second wave. Let's see if they still stand after this. But deep in his mind, a question lingered, one that refused to be ignored. What if the humans were right? The sky above Earth darkened as the second wave of Zorath forces descended. Unlike before, this was not a mere show of power. It was an invasion. Columns of warships lined the atmosphere, their sleek metallic hulls gleaming against the planet's sun. Hundreds of landing crafts broke formation, streaking toward Earth's surface like falling stars. The Zorath were done waiting. On the bridge of the flagship, Supreme Commander Vec watched as his forces spread across the world. This will end today, he muttered. But deep down, he wasn't so sure anymore. The battle that shouldn't have happened in every invasion before, the Zorath followed a predictable pattern. Their overwhelming firepower crushed resistance before it even began. Their superior technology made rebellion impossible. Their psychological warfare broke civilizations long before a single shot was fired. But Earth had shattered that pattern. As the landing crafts touched down, the Zorath expected chaos. They expected surrender. Instead, they walked into a storm. From the streets of London to the mountains of Colorado, from the forests of Canada to the deserts of Australia, humanity struck back. Not with sheer force, but with strategy. The moment the Zorith set foot on Earth, their comms began to flicker. Jamming signals, primitive but effective, scrambled their coordination. Their automated drones malfunctioned as human hackers broke into their systems, repurposing alien tech against them. Then came the unexpected. The human military had refused to meet the Zorith in open battle. No large armies lined up for slaughter. Instead, the invaders were met with relentless guerrilla warfare. Ambushes in the ruins of cities. Explosives rigged in tunnels. Supply routes sabotaged. Entire squads disappeared into forests, never to be seen again. The Zorith weren't fighting an army. They were fighting an idea that had taken root in every human heart. And it was working. The crack in the Zorith's armor on the flagship, Vec's claws dug into the armrest of his command chair. Reports flooded in. Troops missing. Outposts destroyed. And yet, no human leader had stepped forward. There were no negotiations. No signs of desperation. They were supposed to beg. But instead, they adapted. For the first time in his long military career, Vec felt something he had never known before. Doubt. He turned to his officers. They can't win. We outnumber them, outgun them, but they aren't fighting for power, one of his generals interrupted, his voice unusually quiet. They're fighting for something we do not understand. Vec clenched his jaw. The invasion was not over yet. The Zorith still had overwhelming firepower. And yet, a deep, unsettling thought settled in his mind. What if this was not a battle of weapons? What if the real war had already been won, long before the first shot was fired? The battle raged across Earth, but something was wrong. From the moment the Zorith landed, they had expected swift victory. And why wouldn't they? Their fleets were unmatched, their weapons centuries ahead of human technology. No species had ever lasted more than a few days against them. Yet here they were, weeks into the invasion, and not only was Earth still standing, but the humans were winning in ways that made no sense. Supreme Commander Vec leaned over the war table in his command room, glaring at the holomap. Zorathian red marked their occupied zones, but human resistance cells flickered in bright defiant blue, scattered, unpredictable, unrelenting. The humans refused to fight an open war, yet the Zorith were being bled dry. Every supply line the invaders established was cut. Every forward base fell within days of construction. The humans struck from the shadows, disappearing before the Zorith could retaliate. They're not trying to defeat us in battle, Vec realized. They're trying to make this war impossible to win. A cold dread settled in his gut. The Zorith Empire was built on fear. Civilizations knelt before they ever had to fight. But humans? Humans had something no other species possessed. They had belief. The strategy of madness, Commander, one of Vec's advisors spoke, interrupting his thoughts. The latest report is troubling. It seems the humans have done something irrational. Vec narrowed his eyes. What now? The officer hesitated. They destroyed their own factories before we could capture them. Cities we took have been abandoned, stripped of anything useful. When we try to control their people, they vanish into underground networks. Vec's claws tapped against the war table. The humans were not just fighting back. They were denying the Zorith the very thing they needed to win, control. This is insanity, another officer muttered. Every species before them fought to preserve what they had. These humans. They would rather lose everything than kneel, Vec finished. A long silence followed. The realization was dawning on everyone. The Zorith had always won because their enemies had something to lose. But humans had made a terrifying decision. They were willing to sacrifice everything, their cities, their resources, even their lives, just to deny the Zorith the satisfaction of conquest. This was no longer a war for territory. It was a battle of ideals. A dangerous ripple in the galaxy. As the Zorith struggled to contain the chaos on Earth, another problem emerged, one they had not foreseen. The rest of the galaxy was watching. For centuries, hundreds of species had bowed to the Zorith, believing them to be invincible. But now, whispers were spreading. Broadcasts of human defiance leaked beyond Earth's borders. And then, the first signs of something truly dangerous appeared. Reports from occupied worlds, Zorith-controlled planets, showed unusual activity. Small uprisings. Acts of defiance. Other species were beginning to wonder, if the humans could stand against the Zorith, why couldn't they? For the first time in 1,000 years, the unshakable empire of the Zorith was beginning to crack. And the ones responsible were a species that refused to kneel. News of humanity's resistance spread like wildfire. Across the galaxy, whispers of defiance rippled through species once thought to be forever subdued by the Zorith. It started with small pockets of rebellion, here and there. A few coordinated strikes. A handful of sabotaged supply lines. But as the days passed, something extraordinary began to happen. The uprisings weren't isolated anymore. From the remote colonies of the Trass to the devastated world of Zylk, from the once subjugated Velker system to the icy moons of Vroth, former Zorith-controlled planets were stirring. They had seen the humans defy the Empire and, for the first time in centuries, they realized something that had long been buried in their hearts: it was possible to resist. The galaxy watched as their captors began to fall, piece by piece. The Zorith could no longer rely on their old tactics of overwhelming strength. Their empire, built on fear and submission, was unraveling. And it was all because of the humans. An unexpected alliance back on Earth. As the resistance gathered strength, something unexpected happened. Leaders from the human military, once spread across the planet, began communicating with those from conquered worlds. They did not just rally humanity, they began to unite the galaxy against a common foe. The humans, with their unyielding resolve, had become more than just a species fighting for survival. They were now a symbol of hope for the oppressed. A shadowy figure emerged from the chaos, an enigmatic general, known only as the Voice, who spoke to the oppressed races through secret transmissions. We have seen the power of the Zorith, but we have also seen their weakness. Their strength is a lie. What they have never understood is that the strongest force in the galaxy is not a weapon or an empire, it is the spirit of those who will not surrender. The message echoed across the stars. The humans had not only survived the impossible, they had inspired others to rise with them. An alliance was born, a coalition of the willing. Former enemies of the Zorith, long silenced by fear, now fought side by side with humanity. Each race brought its own strengths, its own technology, its own will to fight. Together, they formed a force that the Zorith had never anticipated. The Zorith's last stand on the Zorith flagship, Supreme Commander Vek had watched the reports, growing more and more agitated. The once proud empire, which had ruled for millennia, was now on the brink of collapse. Resistance cells had become armies. Allies of humanity had taken up arms. The once unquestioned supremacy of the Zorith had crumbled. "Commander, we are losing," one of Vek. But it wasn't just the Zorith forces that were fighting. No, this battle was something more. It was the fight for the future. In the streets of Zorith Prime's capital, humans and their allies fought side by side, taking the fight to the heart of the Empire. Cities burned as Zorathian soldiers clashed with their former slaves, each one carrying the weight of generations of oppression. The once mighty Zorith were no longer feared, they were hunted. At the heart of the battle, a figure moved with purpose, a human commander, leading the charge to the Zorith Command Center. His presence was undeniable. The humans had shown their strength, but now, this final act would define them forever. As the commander stood before the towering gates of the Zorith Command Center, he turned to his team. "This is it. We end this now. For Earth. For every planet that has been enslaved. For the future of the galaxy." The team nodded in unison. They knew what needed to be done. The fall of the Zorith inside the command center, Supreme Commander Vek paced nervously. His fleet was gone. His soldiers were retreating. He had lost the war. He had lost the empire. And yet, the thought that gnawed at him wasn't the loss of power. It was something else. Something he had never understood until now. As the doors to the command center blasted open, Vec looked up. A human stood in the doorway, eyes steady, shoulders squared, holding a weapon that glowed with the promise of finality. Vec's voice cracked with the weight of realization. You have won. The human commander stepped forward, his weapon lowered but ready. We didn't win by fighting harder, Vec. We won because we fought for something you can never understand. We fought for each other. We fought for freedom. With a swift movement, the weapon discharged, and the heart of the Zorath Empire fell silent. Vec staggered, his body failing him for the first time in his life. The weight of defeat, of 1,000 years of conquest crumbling in an instant, was too much to bear. The Zorath had fallen. The Empire was no more. The human commander turned to his team. It's over. The galaxy is free. And as the Zorath Empire faded into history, the humans stood tall. They had proven that no empire, no matter how powerful, could ever stand against the will of a people who refused to kneel. With the fall of the Zorath Empire, a new chapter in the galaxy's history began. The sound of victory was not just the cries of humanity, it was the collective roar of every species that had fought, sacrificed, and stood together. The galaxy was no longer divided by fear or oppression. It had been united by a single truth: freedom was worth fighting for. As the dust settled on Zorath Prime, the human commander stood atop the ruins of the Zorath Command Center. The battle had been won, but the real work had just begun. The universe had changed forever. Across the stars, the former slaves of the Zorath began to rebuild. The Trass, the Velker, the Vroth, all of them, once bound by chains of fear, now stood side by side with their human allies, forging a future where no one would ever again be subjugated. But the humans were not content to simply rejoice in their victory. They had learned something important during this war. Freedom was not just the absence of tyranny, it was the strength to stand tall in the face of adversity, to build something better with every step forward. The human commander, now recognized as a leader among many, addressed the new coalition. We are not the victors of this war. All of us are. And together, we will rebuild this galaxy. We will ensure that no one will ever be oppressed again. But more importantly, we will remember why we fought. For hope. For unity. For each other. The words resonated across the galaxy. A new era was beginning, one where the bonds of unity and cooperation were stronger than the weapons of conquest. A life beyond war. As time passed, the human commander returned to Earth, now a beacon of hope and resilience for the galaxy. The streets of Earth were no longer filled with the tension of war, but with the promise of a brighter future. Humanity had not just survived, they had thrived. The commander stood at the edge of a cliff overlooking a sprawling city. The world was peaceful now. No longer were the skies filled with the threat of invaders, no longer was humanity on the brink of extinction. The battle had been fought, and the universe was now a place of hope. But the commander knew that peace was fragile. The lessons of the past could not be forgotten. He walked away from the edge, a small smile on his face, knowing that humanity's true strength was not in their technology, their weapons, or their power. It was in their hearts. The legacy of the unyielding years passed, and the human-led coalition flourished. The galaxy, once ruled by the Zorath, was now a thriving collective of civilizations united in purpose. The former Zorath worlds, once cold and empty, were now teeming with life, rebuilt by those who had once been oppressed. The human legacy was one of resilience, a reminder to all that no matter the odds, no matter the darkness of the universe, there would always be a light that refused to be extinguished. The last remnants of the Zorath scattered, their once proud empire reduced to nothing but a shadow of what it once was. But the lessons they had taught the galaxy would not be forgotten. Humanity had shown that no matter how powerful the enemy, no matter how overwhelming the odds, there was always a way to fight back. And sometimes, the greatest weapon of all was the refusal to kneel. As the stars shone brightly in the sky, the commander's voice echoed one final time, not as a call to arms, but as a reminder of the lessons learned. We do not fight because we must. We fight because we can. We fight because we believe in something greater than ourselves. And we will never stop fighting for that freedom. Years passed, and the galaxy, once fractured and subjugated, had transformed into something new. A civilization united, not by force or conquest, but by shared ideals of freedom, respect, and the belief that all beings, no matter their origin, had the right to choose their path. The Zorith Empire, once the mightiest force in the universe, was now a relic of the past. On Earth, the leader who had once commanded the forces of humanity during their darkest hour now stood at the podium of a grand hall. It wasn't a military podium, nor was it a place of victory, it was a symbol of peace. He had become a figurehead for the new era, a voice of reason, courage, and hope. The people of Earth, and their allies from across the galaxy, had rebuilt their worlds. Trade, cooperation, and mutual respect had replaced the oppression of the past. The human commander, who had once fought for the survival of his species, was now advocating for something far greater, ensuring that no one would ever have to fight for their freedom again. Today, he spoke to an audience of all races. We stand united, not because we defeated an enemy, but because we refuse to kneel in the face of tyranny. This victory belongs to all of us. The humans, the Trass, the Velker, the Vroth, and every species who dared to believe that freedom was worth the cost. A hush fell over the room. For the first time, the galaxy was no longer divided by fear or control. The scars of war were still visible, but they were healing, not through force, but through the efforts of those who sought to build something better. The commander paused, looking out over the crowd of faces that were once ruled by the Zorith, now free to live their lives as they chose. The Zorith believed they were invincible, he continued. But they never understood the true strength of the beings they tried to conquer. The strength of humanity, and of all of us, is not in our weapons, not in our ships, and not in our technology. The true strength lies within our hearts. It's in the belief that, no matter how dark the times may seem, we always have the power to rise again.